So the theme of this week's conference was the future of front-end engineering. And the future is an important thing to think about. It's a difficult thing to predict, and generally anybody who claims to be able to predict the future is either delusional or lying, because we just don't know. It never turns out the way we expected. It's always better in some ways, worse in others. It's always different. And very often it's the same as it is in ways that we didn't expect. So the future is a difficult thing to get a hold of. But even so, it's an important thing to think about and to plan for. So tonight I want to talk about the future, not just of software, but of everything. I want to talk about the future as a larger concept, as a real thing. And I want to talk about the history of the future, because I think it's important. So we're going to start going back. So we're going to start tonight. Let's see. Can we get the video up? No, not that. My video. I want my laptop.
Yours is Walt Disney.
We'll get to that later. Thank you. So we're going to start with this guy. This is me. I used to be cute. So check out the headgear. That's foreshadowing some things we're going to get to later. So my position here is as architect. That's my title. My formal title is architect. And I'm always quick to tell people I'm not a real architect. I'm a software architect, which is a completely different thing. An architect is someone who designs buildings, will take a set of requirements and come up with plans, hopefully aesthetic plans, but at least functional plans, and then a detailed document or set of documents which describe the construction of the thing and the operation of the thing. And those plans could be given to a builder, and the builder can then go and implement them. We don't do anything like that in software development. We have a different thing. So what's the difference between a software architect and a programmer? There really isn't much difference. You could say a software architect is concerned more with the macro and less with the micro, or more with the coarse and less with the fine. But really, I think the thing that's different about software architects is they spend a larger percentage of their time thinking about the future. They're thinking about what's going to happen when things change. They're looking at emerging technologies and making judgments as to when it's prudent to adapt to the new technologies. And they're also asking questions like, what happens if N gets really big? Architects are very much consumed with those sorts of questions. What if everybody in the world wants to come to our site at once? What happens? There's some people who say, that's a problem I want to have. And it turns out that's not a problem you want to have, not unless you've got good architects who have planned for it. So, architecture for software is very different than for everything else. So I've got an analogy for you. So architect is to software architect as doctor is to, it's obvious, it's witch doctor. And that's because software development is still magical. Even though it's all technological, in its elements, it all happens in our brains somehow in ways that we fully don't understand. I used to think that everybody should learn to program, and I don't believe that anymore. I think programming is a talent, much like the ability to draw or to make music or to dance or athletics or a lot of other things where people display talent. I think software is like that. It's just different. There's this magical thing. The witch doctor can do good things for people sometimes, but nobody can really explain how that happens. I think software architecture is very much like that as well. Despite that, we dream about architecture. We talk about software architecture, systems architecture. Architecture is important to us, and we fantasize about a future in which computer science actually gets enough science to it that we can actually take a specification and give it to someone else and actually get it rendered. We can't really do that today because the complete description of a system is the program itself. We don't have any other kind of intermediate document which bridges that adequately. So we dream about architecture. So tonight, I'm going to share with you another dream about architecture, a huge dream, a wonderful dream, to serve perhaps as a metaphor for the sorts of things that we commonly think about. In order to understand that, I'm also going to go back in time a little bit to just after World War II. The United States went into a huge experiment with suburbanization. We had a lot of manufacturing capacity once we went into peacetime, and a lot of that was put into the production of automobiles. And so cheap automobiles suddenly became affordable. Every family was able to buy one, and most of them moved out of the cities and small towns into the suburbs. So a new experiment in living. There was a huge explosion of the middle class, and we radically transformed the way we live here. And it was all made possible by the car. The car promised freedom, that you could just hop in the car anytime and go any place you wanted. That was an amazing thing. We'd never had that before, at least not for everybody. And so we developed a whole new way of life around the automobile. But it didn't all turn out the way we expected because there were some unexpected problems, as there often are. One is that the utility curve of automobiles doesn't work the same way as it does for other systems. For example, the utility of a telephone increases as more people get telephones. When everybody has a telephone, it means you can call anybody. And so the things that we can do with telephones increases. We saw the same thing with the net. When you get more people connected to the net has more value, can do more things, and more of activity can move to the net. That didn't turn out to be the case with cars. It did at first. As more people got cars, it meant that there were more gas stations, so it was more convenient to drive around. The cities, counties, and states were obligated to pave the roads to make them smooth so that the cars could sail across them. So the more people who had cars, the more pressure there was on government in order to do that paving. And all of that was good up to a point until everybody had a car, and then everybody had two cars, and then it wasn't so much fun anymore. Cars don't scale that well. Once everybody has a car, then you get congestion and everything slows down. There are other unexpected problems as well. Everybody remember 9/11 and how terrible that was and all the people who were lost that day. We lose that many people every month because of cars. Cars are killing people at that rate every month. A lot of those are due to alcohol, but a lot of them aren't. It's just cars. And that's something we choose to ignore, and something we choose not to do much about, although the threat of terrorism makes us crazy and causes us to do all sorts of things. But, Henry Ford is 100 times more effective than Osama bin Laden at killing Americans. But that's not something we want to deal with. Another problem with cars, another unintended consequence, is what they did to the cities. Cars did a couple of things. First, they congested the cities because cities were not designed for automobiles. They were designed originally for horse carts and mostly for pedestrians. So when cars were introduced, they pretty much took over the whole thing. So the streets are full of cars, and they do not move very well through the city. So traffic in most cities became intolerable, that you could go a mile on the interstate faster than you could go a block downtown. And that caused a lot of people to want to get out of downtown. So it used to be going downtown to go shopping or to seek entertainment was a great thing. That'd be the highlight of your week. But after the cars took over downtown, that wasn't the case anymore. And with suburbanization, a lot of that activity fled from downtown and moved out to the suburbs, moved out to the shopping mall, moved out to the interstate. So businesses started failing in the cities. And as businesses failed, there were blighting happening within the cities. Crime started to go up. As crime increased, the cities become even less desirable. people evacuating the cities. So we got in this really deadly spiral, which was causing them to fade away or to rot, to collapse, which is a shame because cities are really valuable organizing machinery for civilization. We wouldn't have gotten to where we are had it not been for cities, and our cities were dying. And a lot of people saw this happening and regretted it, and some people wanted to do something about it. One of those people was Walt Disney. Walt Disney saw what was happening to the cities and was very concerned about it, and he had thoughts about how to fix it, which he incorporated into his design for Disneyland. So here's Walt standing in front of a model of Main Street. Main Street is the first thing you see when you enter Disneyland. And when the park opened, this was appeared to be about 50 years old. So it wasn't an ancient city, it wasn't a fantasy city. It was meant to look like something that we had recently lost. That most cities still had buildings that looked like this, except now they were in serious disrepair, or boarded up, or failing, or collapsing, or may already been replaced by ugly post-war buildings. He was trying to set this up with some gentle nostalgia. Remember, just a few decades, how wonderful cities were, how you could walk around and do lots of things. There's shopping, there's entertainment, there's retail. It's all there, and you can just walk around, and it's really pleasant. One of the things about the way he designed it was that you couldn't, well, let me show you an example. It had transport systems, okay, but they didn't dominate the street. You know, there was a horse-drawn streetcar, there was a horseless carriage that you could ride on, a fire truck, a bus, but mainly it was a place for pedestrians. People could walk around in a very pleasant environment. The design for Disneyland was radial. So there was a central plaza, and from that central plaza you could fan out to Adventureland or Frontierland or Fantasyland or Tomorrowland. But the one place you had to visit that was not optional was Main Street. You had to go through Main Street to see the rest of Disneyland. And that was intentional because he wanted this message about how important cities are and trying to rekindle interest in cities in the people who visited the park. The other place we saw this was in Tomorrowland. Walt had tremendous confidence in technology to solve our problems. He was a big believer in technology. So Tomorrowland was full of transportation systems. There was the people mover, there was the monorail, there were automobiles, there was a train, there were even cars. You could drive around miniature cars, but the miniature cars weren't out on the boulevards where the people were. They were on segregated tracks so they wouldn't run into people. And he put these things in here because he wanted to demonstrate to people, you could have this in your city today. I mean, the people mover works, the monorail works, you can take this home. He developed a number of attractions for the 1964 World's Fair in New York. One of the attractions was the Carousel of Progress that he developed for General Electric. It was a stage show with singing robots who told the story about how life is improved with small electric appliances. General Electric was the sponsor. And it was a very nice show, and it had a song. And this is the song. It's important, so I'll read the lyrics to you. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow, and tomorrow's just a dream away. Man has a dream, and that's the start. He follows his dream with mind and heart. And when it becomes a reality, it's a dream come true for you and me. It was written by the Sherman Brothers, the guys who gave us Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious and Chim Chim Cheree and It's a Small World, stuff like that. This maybe is the sappiest song ever written. But Walt believed in this song because it's about him. He is the man with the dream. And he started things and he made them happen by believing in them. And his intention was to communicate that to the rest of us. So when the New York World's Fair closed, they packed up the Carousel of Progress and moved it out to Anaheim and put it in the middle of Tomorrowland where people could ride it. And they added an epilogue to the show in which there was a model city. This is a scale model that people could observe as they were exiting the attraction. And it was Walt got the idea that he wanted to build this. He wanted to do it for real and have real people live in it. So he came up with a plan which went in several phases and each phase had a different name. It was called the Florida Project or Project Winter. It was called Project Future at one point. His intention was to build the city of the future in order to be a living laboratory to show people how we could design specifically for a world with cars in it and a world of technology in order to solve the serious problems that our cities were suffering from. So Walt had a brother, Roy, his older brother, who was his business partner. Originally, their company was called Disney Brothers. Roy was the business guy and Walt was the creative guy. So Roy's job was to help Walt make his dreams come true and to make it a business. And he was really, really good at it. Particularly when you look at Walt's career and the sorts of risks that he took. You know, from the very first one, people told him, don't go to California to make cartoons. Are you crazy? You know, stay out here in the Midwest and find some honest work. You know, don't go do that. They did that and they were successful. Don't make a full-length color animated movie. People can't sit in the dark that long looking at those colors. It'll hurt their eyes. People told him, don't go and make live-action movies. Hollywood's a mean place. They'll eat you up. Stick to the cartoons. People told him, don't try to build an amusement park. It's a crappy business. They go out of they're seasonal. They don't last very long. You don't want to do that. And in each one of these things, Roy would figure out a way to allow Walt to do it, and ultimately it was extremely successful, and they went from one success to another. A story that sort of describes their relationship. They were in the middle of Snow White, the first full-length animated feature. In order to devote the full attention of the studio in Snow White, they stopped making the short films, which had produced all the revenue up to that point. So there wasn't much revenue coming in. And the expenses of making this full-length movie were really high. And so Roy was having to borrow a lot of money. And he was living with this debt and the obligation that was hanging over his head. He wasn't sleeping. He was just really concerned about how deep in the hole they were going. So one day he went to Walt to explain how terrible their situation was. And Walt laughed. He laughed because he reminded Roy, when they first came to town, they couldn't borrow a nickel. Now they were into the Bank of America for millions of dollars. I mean, they were getting it done. You know, they were going somewhere. They were somebody. So when Walt wanted to build Disneyland, Roy, the business guy, said, okay, we'll figure out how to do this right. So they commissioned some studies looking at transportation and climate and consumer behavior before they finally decided to do the park in Anaheim, California. When Walt came up with the idea that he wanted to build a city, they did that again. They went out and did a lot of research, looked again at climate and economic trends and so on before they decided to do their project in Central Florida. Roy had no confidence that they knew anything about how to build a city, but Walt did, and that was enough. So that was going to get them started. Now, Walt was not interested in building a company town, and there's a long history of company towns in this country. Places like Hershey, Pennsylvania, and Roebling, New Jersey, and Pullman, Illinois. There are lots of them. Some of them were intended to be workers' paradises. A lot of them turned out to be more like virtual slave labor camps. In 1955, Tennessee Ernie Ford had an unexpected #1 top hit with 16 tons, which described life in one of these company towns. You load 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't call me because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. So Walt was not interested in building a company town. He was trying to build a completely different thing, a thing that no one had ever seen before. He wanted to build the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. He called it Epcot. And it was going to be a place where people could go and explore the future. That was always going to be in a state of becoming. So they went to Florida. They bought 43 square miles of swamp and orange grove with the intention of building this thing. Walt wanted a lot of land because he wanted to avoid what happened in Anaheim. They bought just enough land for the park and the parking lot, and speculators bought up all the land around the park and put up ticky-tack tourist traps and stuff, which he thought was really ugly and he didn't want to have as part of his experience, but he couldn't control it. So he bought way, way more land than they thought they were going to need. I mean, they got an area of land about the size of the city of San Francisco on which to do their experiment. Walt was not interested in building another theme park. He'd done that. He wanted to build the city. Roy convinced him that you have to build the park in order to get the state to want you to come in. So it was like, all right, reluctantly, we'll build the park, but really, this is about building Epcot. Walt intended this to be a living laboratory where people can go and see these experiments in living in the future, and at any time he could rip any part of it out and replace it if he feels it's not working or if it could be improved. So this is a diagram or a drawing of a part of the city. The center part of the city is a hotel, and around it is the transport lobby where people can enter the city through the monorail and then move to the people movers, which come off those discs. And the rest of downtown is divided into these wedge shapes, and they had ideas that each wedge would contain a completely different type of architecture and a different kind of use, so that they could do lots of experiments within this space. I mean, that center one looks a little bit like a European village, lots of different forms being tried here. In order to do all of these experiments and to build something at this scale, they felt that they needed a completely different style of governance than most construction projects would get. So they wanted to petition the state of Florida to essentially make their company a government, give it the rights of a government, make it immune from interference from the other local governments, so that they would have the power to operate this future city. As part of their petition to the Florida legislature, Walt made a film in which he describes what his plans for Epcot are. And I'd like to show that to you right now. So ladies and gentlemen, Walter Elias Disney. So that was quite a dream, wasn't it? So at that time, Walt Disney was the most trusted man in America. He was the, families obviously trusted implicitly to mind their children. What's more important, mothers loved him. He was also trusted by American industry. I mean, after the work he had done at the New York World's Fair, there are all sorts of corporations and manufacturers who wanted to work with Walt. He was in this position where perhaps he alone of anybody in the world was able to design and build his own city to his own plan. You're probably wondering why you'd never heard of this. It's because something terrible happened. He died of lung cancer. He was a smoker his whole life. He started as a teenager. People were always telling him, Walt, you should stop smoking, it's going to kill you. And he would joke, a fellow's got to have one vice. And then it killed him. So the company was, what do we do? How do we go ahead without Walt? It's not that Walt knew how to build the city, it's just that Walt had the confidence He was certain that whatever problems they encountered in trying to put this together, the Imagineers would find a solution, or their partners in industry, they could get this done somehow. So Walt's brother Roy decided to continue and to go ahead and do the project. Now, at the time, he was in his 70s, and he was hoping to retire, but his job was to make Walt's dreams come true, and so he was going to do that. So he stayed on through the construction of the Magic Kingdom, and then he retired. So with the establishment of the Magic Kingdom, they had their foothold in Florida. They had a terrific revenue generator. The park was profitable from opening day. And they had sort of the intellectual collateral that they needed in order to convince everybody else to come together and work on the rest of the project. The only thing they didn't have was confidence. The management, after Roy, didn't have the nerve to do this. They just didn't understand what Walt was trying to do. Pretty much all that there was left was what you saw in the film. That was it. Walt figured they'd make up the rest as they went along. And because it had always worked. Like they told the state of Illinois that they could build a robot that looked like Abraham Lincoln, who could rise up out of a chair and give a speech that would make people cry in 1964. And nobody had ever seen anything like that before. And there were no models. They just did it. They figured out how to do it, and they made it work. Walt figured they could do this too, but the management didn't have the same imagination. Walt had failed to train a replacement. So there was nobody left in management who could do this. Now, the film was successful. It went to the Florida legislature, and they were convinced. So they created a special act which gave the Disney company enormous powers, exempted them from control and taxation of other governments, and allowed them a lot of governmental powers of their own, completely unprecedented, so that they could build Walt's city. So they felt they had to build something because they told everybody this Epcot thing was happening. So they built another theme park. And it wasn't a bad theme park, and the design of Epcot was basically two parks, both of which Walt would have liked. A permanent World's Fair. After the fair in '64, he thought it was silly that you build this thing and then tear it down. You should have it ongoing. And a technology expo. So it does both of those things, and he would have liked that. But this wasn't Epcot. This was not what he wanted to do. So some people might look at what he was trying to do and say, well, that's crazy. One man can't build a city. A city is too complicated. That you need a free market in order to do this. That's the only thing that's ever worked in history, which isn't exactly true historically, but a lot of people think so. Walt wouldn't have gone along with that for a couple of reasons. One was their experience in Anaheim when the free market built all the ticky-tack stuff around his property in Disneyland. He was really upset about that. They built really bad-looking stuff, and he was blamed for degrading Anaheim in that way. And it wasn't his fault, it was the free market's fault. So he didn't trust the free market to do this. Besides, it was the free market that was killing the cities. And this whole exercise was to fix that. And so he didn't trust the free market to do that. Other people would say that government is the proper thing, and Walt didn't really trust the government there either, again because of his experience trying to build Disneyland. They were working with the city of Anaheim, and Anaheim's building codes were designed mainly for orange groves and tract homes, and they were trying to build things at Disneyland unlike anything the city had ever considered, and the city was very slow in keeping up with the sorts of building standards that they needed to build their park. Walt's standards for quality, safety, longevity, beauty were far in excess of the city's requirements. But even so, getting his plans through the city was very difficult. And he was very resentful when the same city allowed the ticky-tack builders to do their crappy stuff after giving him a hard time. So he wanted absolute control over this, no government oversight. He wanted to have his own building codes so that he could experiment with new technologies in order to build out his new city. So he wanted to do this all within a corporation, and he wanted to be a benevolent dictator. Someone once suggested to him that he should run for mayor of Los Angeles, and he said, "Why would I want to be mayor when I'm already king?" Because he was the king of Disneyland. So if you look at the way he thought about Disneyland, it's a separate country. It's sovereign. It's the happiest place on earth. It's completely different. So when you pass through its gates, you first have to buy a tourist visa, and then you can enter. And that tourist visa expires at the end of the day, and then you must vacate the country. And maybe you can come back tomorrow. They hope you do, but you can't stay. Nobody gets to live at Disneyland except for Walt. He had an apartment above the firehouse. That's not what it was for. So he didn't want to share control over his domain with the people. And he was thinking that he wanted a similar kind of thing for Epcot, but that doesn't make sense. That you can't have people living in a city and deny those people the rights of citizenship. It's necessary. Corporations are good for a lot of things. They can often get things done very quickly, usually much faster than governments can, often faster than markets can. But sometimes corporations behave badly, and the citizens need some recourse when it happens. Now, you might think that, well, Walt, being the most trusted man in the country, wouldn't abuse people like that, and that was probably true, but what if Walt died? And in fact, Walt did die. What would happen if other people who weren't as good as Walt took over? And in fact, the company shows us a number of examples of that. The Orlando Observer printed a story that was critical of the management of the company and the way they were working with the local governments around Disney World. So the company refused to allow the paper to deliver their papers to the park. Now, you could say if someone who's operating a hotel, which was what they were doing, should be allowed to decide what is sold on their property. It's sleazy and kind of smelly, but, you can say, free enterprise, maybe they could do that. But if it were a city, then this is tyranny, right? It's censorship. It's preventing the people from having access to a free press, which is terrible. An even better example, there were a number of projects attempting to connect the airport and Disney World and other locations in the counties by light rail, or later by a high-speed maglev system, which Walt would have loved. Walt loved transportation systems. He loved trains. The whole point of this was to show people transportation technology. And so if he could have had the fastest train in America in daily operation with a stop on his property, that would have been great. I mean, that was what this whole thing was about. So everybody coming through his property would get to see this train. The company caused it to fail because they wanted to capture all of the tourist traffic coming through the site. They didn't want to have a high-speed way of people having the freedom to go to other places. So the company was moving exactly opposite to Walt's intentions. So ultimately, I think they would have figured out some other way to do it, some partnership of all of these three things, a compromise, maybe a new structure, in order to provide governance for Epcot. This is really a fascinating story, and there's a lot of information out there about it. I recommend these books. Walt Disney and the Quest for Community looks at this story from the perspective of urban planning and design. Project Future, the inside story behind the creation of Disney World, looks at it more in terms of real estate. And Married to the Mouse looks at it more in terms of government and community relations. Also, the video that you just saw came off of a DVD collection called Tomorrowland, Disney in Space and Beyond. Highly recommend it. It's mostly about the Man in Space series, which was presented on television and showed people the possibility of space travel. When John Kennedy announced that we were going to go to the moon, the reason that wasn't a ridiculous thing to do was because Walt had already shown us how we were going to get there. So I highly recommend watching this video. One of the special features on the second disc is the video that you just saw. And I highly recommend it. That video is also available on YouTube and other places. I would like you to have other people go see that. Then there are a couple of CD sets that are interesting. There's Walt Disney and the '64 World's Fair and A Musical History of Disneyland. Both contain complete recordings of the Carousel of Progress. So you can hear, you can almost hear Walt's voice in it talking about technology and how it improves our lives as we go forward. So, and also you might want to visit Yesterland. Yesterland was the source for a lot of the photographs that I've shown you. Yesterland is a website dedicated to the history of Disneyland. It was created by Werner Weiss, who was a schoolmate of mine. We both went to Horace Ensign Junior High School and Newport Harbor High School in Newport Beach, California. We grew up about 15 miles away from Disneyland. So in a sense, we grew up at Disneyland. And it had a big impact, I think, on both of us. So let me say a few more things about the future. So when I was growing up, I thought a lot about the future. And we had a specific date for it. We knew when the future was going to be here. It was going to be the 21st century. When the 21st century is here, that will be the future. So welcome to the future. I mean, here's where we are. We've been here for 10 years already. And I have to tell you, the future is quite a disappointment. It's not at all what we expected. So I'd like to review some of my expectations for the future and contrast them to how it actually turned out. So Walt didn't show us how to fix the cities, but somehow it worked out anyway, that enough people remembered or rediscovered the importance of cities, and they've started coming back to life. And it came about as a partnership of interests, as I was describing for the governance of Epcot. We've got governments and redevelopment agencies and companies and individuals, citizens, all working together to restore our downtowns and make them viable again. We are creating pedestrian malls within the cities, places where we can walk and shop and have pleasant experiences. We destroyed the rail systems in our cities years ago, but they're coming back, which is great. So because transportation, as Walt saw, is in fact a part of what caused the cities to fail in the first place. And we're also seeing new regional transportation possibilities open up. For example, California is considering a new high-speed rail system which would connect Northern California and Southern California so that you could walk into Duradon Station in San Jose, 2 hours later, step out of Union Station in Los Angeles, sit down and have a French dip sandwich. That's going to be wonderful. I'm really looking forward to that. I hope that's in our future. We had two ideas about how war was going to be in the future. There was either going to be global peace or total annihilation. And we weren't at all clear when I was growing up which way it was going to go. Fortunately, we didn't do the annihilation thing, so that's good. That's real good, in fact. But we didn't get to the global peace, and that's a disappointment. We should have been there. Particularly after our experience in Vietnam, where we lost a lot of good people and caused enormous damage and suffering. And our intention was mainly just to look tough. There wasn't really anything else to get from that. We didn't learn the lessons from that. Now we're in two wars, which are similarly misguided. And we've got good people over there dying for no good purpose, at least not that I can see. And in fact, we're in some ways making our own situation significantly worse. That they're not there fighting for liberty, they're there fighting for stupidity. And that's a disappointment. I was hoping we'd do better than that in the future. There was a lot of hatred, a lot of bigotry in the country when I was growing up. And we've gotten a lot better about that. There are still people who have sick hearts, who are still hateful, but they can't be righteous about that hate the way they were. So there are always going to be sick people and always angry people. But we now know that we need to be better at that. But we're not completely there yet. So there's still some classes of people that you can righteously hate in this country, and that's unfortunate. For example, you can be righteous in denying homosexuals the same rights that other citizens have. That's absurd. It's now acceptable to have righteous hatred of 1 billion Muslims. Again, that doesn't make any sense. There are even people who have righteous hatred against babies. Babies with Mexican parents should be denied citizenship. Crazy stuff like that. Now, the United States is not the first country to have righteous hatred. It's been going on as long as there are people, as far as we know. And there are other places in the world that have more righteous hatred than we do. So we're certainly not the worst, but we should have been the best. The American melting pot was supposed to be the example to the world about how we can all live together. And the fact that we haven't gotten that right yet, that is a disappointment. And that's another thing that I hope we get right in your future. Another thing is computers. Computer hardware is way better than we ever expected. The things we've done in miniaturization, in performance and cost, just amazingly good stuff. On the other hand, software is way behind expectations. We thought software would be way better now than it is. So clearly there's a huge need for more research in software development because the way we're doing things right now is still too magical and way too hard. We didn't anticipate the internet, the ability to connect everybody in the world on a free, open, two-way network. That's again, is another thing. And that's maybe the main thing that gives me the confidence that we're going to get the other stuff right. I think the internet as the mechanism by which we all get smarter collectively, I think that's it. And that's why I'm here. And I think that may be why a lot of you are here too. So I wish you luck on your project futures. There's a lot still to do, and I think you're the guys to do it. So on that, thank you and good night.